thing I'd like to do is repaint. The paint works okay, but it is looking a little bit tired. You know, you've got a sort of blue randomly transitioning to white here and a couple of sort of dodgy lines around here. The name is sort of stuck on, so I'm going to replace that. And apologies for those people who don't like this sort of thing, but I am going to rename the ship as well. So let's hope that doesn't give me any bad luck. But I'm going to repaint. I'm thinking a slightly greener kind of blue. Obviously keep the red anti-fouling. Slightly darker blue here. Possibly make these gunnels blue as well. Keep the white at the top and then possibly have one of these in red. But I haven't quite decided on the colour scheme yet. But it just needs a little bit of a touch-up, really. At the back, you can see where the propeller shaft comes out. That seems to spin fairly freely, but just needs a bit of a check. Packing with some grease, I think. And then the actual superstructure and the masts all look pretty fine.
So just before painting began in earnest, I wanted to make sure that the hull was exactly as I wanted it. So I've done a little bit of sanding here and there on what would be sort of rough edges. And there was also a little bit on the bowsprit, where for some reason the angle of the stem of the ship changed right at the very last moment, and it was irritating me for some reason, so I sort of marked up what I needed to remove, and then using my really quite handy Tamiya saw just cut through that and just sort of straightened up the bowsprit. And then, having actually finished that, I then went along with the file and just sort of straightened it all up and neatened it all up and made it all look nice and presentable. But I'm glad I did this because it's one of those things that I think would have annoyed me had I left it as it was. So another good job done and a step closer to actual painting.
So here we are, we've got Humbrol 113, sort of matte rust red. That is the colour on white paper. And we've got some Humbrol white, and I think white is 34. Humbrol 34. And I'm just going to add white to the matte 113 until I'm happy with it. You'll notice I'm mixing direct into the pot because I want to have a decent quantity of this paint to make sure I can cover the whole of the hull. Here we go, here is a very, very full airbrush container with the colour I've arrived at. as you can see, quite a lot more pink than it used to be. So we'll just do a quick spray and see how that goes on the actual hull. Now, it's always a bit tricky to work out how to support a model while you're painting it. So what I've done here is, from my workbench, I've suspended a couple of lengths of wood which sort of hold the model out in place. As you can see, these bits of wood slot underneath the masts and such and allow me to get the anti-fouling done. Now at this point, of course, it's quite easy because there's no masking to be done or anything. But this is quite a nice arrangement actually for pretty much the whole of the model. And of course the particularly nice thing is that the spray is sort of directed away from the wood and the stuff that you want to keep looking fresh underneath. So hopefully this will work quite well. And I'm really happy with this colour actually. It looks business-like. It looks a lot less jolly and cheery and colourful than the original red. So that's really good. Very happy with that. So, need to mask off the propeller. Then need to get on and do the other side. There you go, the ship all masked up for the next section. It's always a bit tricky, but the approach I've gone for is to use the expensive masking tape, the yellow Tamiya stuff for the actual line, and then cheap decorators masking tape just to sort of hold everything else together. Sheets of paper to protect the anti-fouling stuff that I've already done, and I've sort of, you know, covered over the rudder, all that kind of stuff. And then we've got a sort of skirt along the bottom of the model which allows me just to protect everything whilst I go in and spray along here. And I've also put a cover of masking tape on the gunnels here, as you can see. That just stops any spray getting onto the deck itself. Little bits of spray I can mop up with turpentine, but I want to avoid that as much as possible. And then I'll just go over and pick out the bits that I missed with a paintbrush at a later date. So there you go, on with the show. Right, while the compressor charges up, I'll just show you the colour I've got. This is Mr. Colour 34, and this is going to be the sky blue for the main hull of the ship. So that's coat number 1 dry, and we'll just leave that for a fair while. You can see we've got some clear areas where coverage hasn't really been achieved and other areas where it has, but it's a good start. I quite like the effect of the airbrush because, you know, how do you think these things are painted in the real world? Normally with an airbrush, and it doesn't quite give you a perfect coverage everywhere. Somewhere you'll get subtle lines like that, and I quite like that. I like the slight imperfection of it. So anyway, so far so good. Come back in about half an hour or so and do another coat. Right, you join me in the shed. A very messy shed actually. Anyway, you join me in the shed, and as you can see, the antifouling and the main blue of the hull are now complete. And I've still got the masking that masked off the blue from the antifouling when I sprayed the blue earlier, well, last week actually. Now what I'm going to do is I want to do another stripe just at the waterline, which is going to be in white, and I also want to paint this sort of gunnel in white as well, so it's another couple of lines of masking. So that's the next step, and then we'll get it all painted. Right, so here's the result post-painting, and as you can see there's a few issues. Hints of overspray, blue overspray here. This is an area where the red is, where I masked off, so that needs to be painted blue, but again, more overspray there. A bit of overspray onto the rope guide there. Bit of leakage from under the masking tape. Just, you know, little things again, a bit of overspray there. And then at the back, I slightly cocked up the lines, the white line rather, dips down at the end, whereas it should go up. So I'll hand paint up and just redress that as best I can. And there's other fairly characteristic little issues on the other side as well. Nothing major. I mean, you're always going to have little imperfections here and there, and to a point, little imperfections actually, I think, add to the realism, but we do need to do a little bit of touching up. So I'm going to start off by dealing with the overspray. Where I can, I'm going to rub it with some turpentine or some white spirit and see if I can rub the overspray off. If it becomes apparent that I can't, I will get the relevant colours out and just go over and remedially paint some of the areas that need painting. So we'll crack on with that now. So with a white spirity cotton brush, cotton bud, I'm just going to rub on the area. And the idea here is that the overspray is right on the surface. And so that's far more vulnerable paint to being rubbed off, and sure enough, that's what's happened there. What else can I do? I'll just zoom out for you. Sorry, agricultural filming, I know. But if it shows what I want to show, that's good. Same here. Just rubbing on this rope cleat. And that is being a bit stubborn, so I think what I might do there, instead of rubbing and rubbing and rubbing, I think I'll just paint over that in black. A couple of little bits here and there. To be honest, it ain't bad at all. What I'll do is I'll move the camera over now and just show you some other bits. Clearly these gunnels need a bit of white on them, but it ain't bad. And the rear, don't know why I've stopped using nautical terms recently. The stern is a bit more white, and that's coming off really easily. Beautiful. Same there. Yeah, the white's coming off a lot easier than the blue actually. Cool, right. That's a pretty good start, I would say. Right, that seems like an appropriate place to end for the day. That's the main bulk of the painting finished. Of course, I need to go and do the name of the vessel next, so that'll be the next episode. And after that, I'll probably do an episode on sort of knocking this all back and weathering the vessel down to make it look like it's had a life, it's been used. So, as always, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, do please like and or subscribe. And if you've got any questions or comments, bung them down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.